Welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Floerke. I'm the program rep for this presentation, final thesis presentation, Milestone 4 by Fahmida Ahmed on Interstitial Learningscapes, Fostering Child-Centric Environments. Supervisors Cheryl Atkinson, second reader Masha, Etkind, graduate program director Marco Polo, and we also have three guests with us today, architect Susan Lewin, architect Stephen Teeple, and Aurelia Santos from Early Childhood Studies at Ryerson. Fahmida, you have approximately 20 minutes to present. I won't cut you off. I'll leave it up to you to be mindful of the time, and then we will move into questions after that, and we'll then move into a discussion following. Okay, Fahmida, please.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, I'll start. So my architecture plays a significant role in facilitating positive spatial experiences. Similarly, behavioral evidence indicates that architecture directly impacts the learning environment of early years of childhood. Hermann Hertzberger explains the relationship between architecture and learning as it is about what lies between architecture and education, and how the two, given certain conditions, influence one another. The architecture of interstitial learningscapes aims to construct an environment that facilitates different modalities of enhanced learning experiences through the exploration of interstitial spaces. Due to the ongoing pandemic, children have disengaged from their physical learning environments and transitioned to digital learning, highlighting the lack of varied and effective indoor-outdoor interspatial relationships in the current educational model. The early 20th century displayed an increased focus on educational psychology and school architecture. However, except for a few experimental schools, the elementary public educational systems in North America have for several decades delivered education through a series of double-loaded corridors and identical classrooms, producing spatially efficient but neutral learning environments. These challenges provide an opportunity to reinvent learning environments that encompasses new modes of interweaving indoor and outdoor learning spaces to achieve holistic learning environments that supports child development. By addressing the primary question of how architecture can affect learning, this thesis investigates enhancing learning for children of 4 to 12 years of age through the exploration of informal learning spaces and by developing an understanding of theories of early learning pedagogy and learning environments. The thesis primarily explores the layered spatial interrelationships between the indoor and outdoor learning environments and the opportunities in between spaces unfold. In this thesis, learning was primarily discussed from as early as the 20th century while reflecting on the 19th century factory model of education. The 20th century was a significant period in educational history where learning environments continuously transformed due to societal and economic influences, demographics, architectural styles, pedagogy, and hygiene in Toronto. During the early 20th century, educational theorists popularized their interest in child psychology and learning. The four movements primarily addressed in this thesis were the Montessori Movement, Waldorf pedagogy, experiential learning, and Reggio Emilia's model of learning environments. The educational theorists Maria Montessori, Rudolf Steiner, John Dewey, and Loris Malaguzzi focused on the well-being of learners, advocating that the design of learning environments directly impacted learning outcomes and their learning experiences. The educational movements proposed designing holistic learning environments while focusing on decentralizing learning, child-scale spatial organization, and experiential learning. They also considered the emotions, behavior, and the intellect of the child, as well as promoting direct and indirect exposure to the natural environment. Pedagogy acts as a catalyst for defining learning environments and its relation to the pupils. However, school architecture has not significantly or adequately evolved to meet progressive pedagogical methods. Today, learning requires options, diversity, and flexibility. Therefore, school environments must internalize the idea of personalized learning, addressing the pupil with the freedom to make decisions. Therefore, the interstitial learningscape advocates the pedagogical scheme of experiential learning. Interstitial is defined as the space between two objects or two environments. We must leave behind the idea that one size fits all and focus on generating qualitative and diverse learning environments. Therefore, the primary interstitial design elements explored were the liberation of learning spaces, transitional spaces, and blurring of boundaries. Through the following case studies, interstitial and informal learning spaces were investigated within the context of educational architecture. So the Crow Island School was a key precedent of the progressive era in 1940, influencing many experimental schools in Toronto. Crow Island was an example of breaking away from the traditional block massing, and the school promoted layered learning experiences through L-shaped classrooms, housing individual and collaborative workspaces, with direct access to in-between pockets of outdoor spaces. A similar approach was taken in the Unterdorf Elementary School in 2018, which promoted smaller class sizes and clustered environments of diverse learning spaces, with direct access to outdoor interstitial environments of canopied areas for play and learning. Both schools promoted the decentralization of formal learning. Transitioning areas like corridors or staircases are often less considered compared to classrooms. However, children spend about 20% of their typical day within these spaces. The Strawberry Vale Elementary School in British Columbia and the Timber School in Kumo effectively enhances circulatory spaces, emphasizing the need for transparency, daylight, and the use of local materials. Strawberry Vale is designed with jagged corridors occupied with cavities of informal spaces. Similarly, the Timber School advocates for social interactions by converting all visible corridors into informal learning spaces surrounding the atriums. These transitional spaces have a high level of affordances where the space incites different emotions and behaviors. For example, the staircase or the atrium can house activities such as gathering, interaction, seating, play, or a moment of pause. Herman Hertzberger claimed that schools are often situated on large and underdeveloped green spaces, although there's potential for educational opportunities here. The suburban school typology is typically composed of 1 to 2 stories situated within a fenced, sodded, and paved landscape, with classrooms arranged linearly around a double-loaded corridor, typically a representation of the factory model of education. Therefore, this thesis investigates suburban school typology, recognizing the lack of variety in current elementary schools. The early 20th century revealed school architecture was designed around discipline and concentration, where several public schools were built largely as a reflection of the factory model classroom in North America. In fact, more than 50% of TDSB schools today were built more than 60 years ago, showcasing similar parameters to this traditional scheme. So the site selected for this design project is the suburban Regent Heights Public School located within a residential neighborhood at Pharmacy Avenue and St. Clair Avenue. Regent Heights is currently challenged with overcrowdedness, overcapacity, and aged infrastructure. The 2-story school building showcases resemblance to the factory model of education scheme, showcasing neutrality in learning environments and unnaturalized and banal school landscapes, displaying an apparent disconnect between the indoor and outdoor environments. Regent Heights is 6th on the TDSB's list for replacement schools. The school constructed an addition on the northeast of the building, as well as 6 additional portables. And however, this was no permanent solution, henceforth requiring the school to be demolished and replaced due to increasing enrollments. Currently, the Regent Heights Public School accommodates 515 students, operating at a capacity of 106%. Therefore, the new replacement school will aim to accommodate 515 students while addressing the proposed increase to 573 students. The current TDSB outlines design guidelines for the typical public school, which includes typical kindergarten and regular classrooms accommodating a maximum of 33 students, and experiential classrooms such as the library, art, drama, music, and the gym. Therefore, to shift away from the conventional model, the replacement school proposes to accommodate additional experiential classes, workshops, and multipurpose areas, and the need for diversification through an interstitial approach. A stimulating environment inspires and engages the pupil in the act of exploration and learning. As a prototypical vehicle for interstitial learningscapes, the new replacement school proposes an interplay between the internal and external learning environments, providing flexible and diverse indoor and outdoor spaces to learn and play within, putting an emphasis on learning beyond the classroom as a response to adhering to the contemporary pedagogical schemes of experiential learning. A set of design concepts were defined to explore interstitial learning environments, which includes the increased exposure to nature, implementing natural daylight, transparency and openness, visual connectivity, and investigating circulation as an interior interstitial space to break away from the existing narrow corridors. So the initial massing addresses shifting away from the conventional model of learning. The three-story form is composed around a central courtyard, and the volume is further broken down by carving out roof terraces that connects the different learning environments. The incorporation of vertical interstitial spaces through atriums and sky courts are key interconnected spaces of gathering and interactions. Lastly, through pattern shifting on the facade, a series of outdoor pockets are carved out to compose indoor and outdoor interstitial spaces. So the primary entrance is located on the west side off a Pharmacy Avenue with a secondary entrance on the south. Students enter into a central foyer surrounding the sky court. Level 1 primarily houses administrative spaces, the library, larger gathering spaces, the grades 1s, 4s, and the kindergarten clusters. The school is organized into clusters specific to each grade, composed of informal and formal learning spaces with direct access to the central courtyard. The organization of the environments is a response to Waldorf's pedagogy that indicates that ages 0 to 7 requires an environment that provides freedom of movement and choice. Therefore, all the grades on the ground floor have direct access to the outdoors, whereas ages groups 7 to 14 require an environment that provokes emotions and creativities, providing them with additional flexible and multi-purpose spaces to explore and learn within. So this is an enlarged floor plan of an example of the cluster. Each cluster is composed of 4 homerooms per grade to accommodate reduced class sizes of 18 to 20 students for a more effective learning experience and learning outcomes. An activated indoor and outdoor pocket is inserted between 2 homerooms to promote intermingling between students of different ages, which aids in improving child development. Experiential classrooms and spaces are centrally located within the cluster. This perspective showcases the shifting and carving of pockets on the facade, producing an interplay between the outdoor and indoor learning environments. These canopied spaces provide semi-enclosed areas of activities such as individual play and learning, movement, improving child development through autonomy. The facade is also composed of a set of bay windows varying in size and height to address child scale and introduces a subtle color palette of the primary colors of yellow, red, and blue. There are miniature pocketed spaces protruding out of the facade as well from the formal learning spaces, allowing for playful interactions and experiences while indirectly emerging into the exterior courtyard. Level 2 houses the grades 2s, 5s, kindergarten clusters, and experiential classrooms. Level 2 is also composed of key interstitial moments such as the central gathering space around the sky court, the intersecting bridge terraced pockets, and the kindergarten roof terrace. So this perspective is an example of the terraced outdoor pockets overhanging out into the courtyard, developing canopies below and creating a sense of being a part of the courtyard as a whole. The outdoor pocket acts as a buffer zone, which is partially sheltered by a canopy with large openings, providing shade and direct daylight. The space accommodates playful learning through movement and social exchanges among children. Lastly, level 3 accommodates the grades 3s and 6s and an outdoor roof terrace. The terrace accommodates experiential and instructional learning such as gardening and outdoor classrooms. It will be a place of interactions, play, and communal learning, promoting an increased exposure to outdoor environments, which provides academic, social, emotional, and physical benefits to the child's health. Rudolf Steiner advocated for the primacy of the aesthetic in designing learning environments for children. Therefore, the clusters were organized to design a variety of formal and informal zones where children can adapt to and build their own personalized experience. The classrooms are designed with exposed timber structure and wooden floors to express a warm and calming environment. The varying window sizes offers a greater incidence of direct and ambient daylighting while framing views of the skies, trees, and outdoor activities. The large windows and reduced window sill heights address child scale and stimulates curiosity and observations. Children are socio-environmental learners, and learning occurs through their immediate relationship to the social and physical setting. Therefore, through shifting, carving, and subtractive methods, the cluster arrangements are composed of variations that include individual and collaborative learning pockets, outdoor pockets, and play spaces that incite spontaneous informal learning exchanges. Large-scaled interstitial spaces account for larger encounters, so the atmosphere of these spaces are sensorily engaging with the scent of wood and its consistent use in floors, walls, and ceilings designing a coherent language of architecture throughout the learning environments. What is also proven to improve the indoor air quality and the mental and physical well-being of children. The atrium introduces nature within through greenery, promoting stewardship and responsibility towards the environment. The vertical interstitial spaces filter streaks of daylight, making children aware of changing outdoor conditions. Lastly, a play of scale is introduced through the opening in the railings for playful interactions and observations throughout. So the bridge as a larger scaled interstitial space connects the learning environments and provides a canopied area below in which children can internally and externally use year-round as a space of play and gathering. It is a primary space of observation with views into the courtyard, the roof terraces, and beyond. These perspectives compared to larger scaled pockets are smaller scaled independent and play pockets. The independent pockets develop a sense of calmness for quieter activities such as reading or smaller group engagements, whereas the play pockets showcase a louder and activated pocket of movement, play, and learning. The stepped seating areas and low ceiling entrances into pockets address scale and diversity within the spaces. Reconnecting children with the natural environment can increase their attention span, reduce emotional and physical stress, increase creativity, and improve child development. The outdoor learningscape is designed with personalized, group, active, and nature-related learning spaces that activates the landscape and provides children with diverse opportunities for play, fostering collaborative skills and improving their motor skills. Personalized learning suggests independent activities where group learning indicates areas such as outdoor classrooms. Active play introduces a non-obstructed area for physical activities and movement, allocated primarily on the east side. Lastly, activities like gardening promote stewardship and the child's sense of self within the natural environment. The group learning activities are primarily located centrally within the courtyard, while personalized learning is located on the perimeter near the canopied areas. The gardening activities are located between the group and the personalized learning zones as a transitionary space. This section is cutting through the central courtyard, displaying the protruding terraces and the windows on the facade, as well as the canopied areas and the roof terrace. The learning environments promote transparency and openness, allowing for a greater incidence of daylight and learning through social exchanges. An example is the central sky court as a vertical interstitial space of gathering and outdoor activities. The central courtyard is designed with outdoor classrooms, gardening spaces, structured play areas, and areas of individual activities, allowing children to engage with the natural environment. Studies show that the exposure to nature improves children's mental plasticity while developing a sense of ownership and responsibility for their space. Classrooms are situated within forested areas with exposure to natural elements such as earth, sand, and vegetation, improving the children's psycho-emotional health. And moreover, outdoor learning environments are critical today due to the pandemic, where the need for natural ventilation is significant. Maria Montessori emphasized that education is a natural process carried out by the child and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. As the 2019 coronavirus pandemic has emphasized the importance of the physical environment and the factors that come into play when children are disengaged from it, it produces an opportunity to reflect on learning environments architecturally to meet the needs of the 21st century children and education requirements. The Regent Heights Public School diversifies learning, choreographs curiosity, and enhances learning experiences by expanding learning spaces beyond the formal learning zones to foster informality within the learningscape. The in-between spaces are where learning and socialization blurs. Therefore, interstitial spaces need to be considered as net spaces rather than simply gross floor area. Therefore, the architecture of interstitial learningscapes promotes an environment constructed of spatially and sensorially rich interstitial spaces and interwoven experiences between the formal, informal, and the natural environment, creating an enhanced learning environment and set of experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahmida. So I'd like to open up for questions first, if there are any questions, kind of for better understanding.
Would it be possible to just look at some of the site plan, just flash through the site plan and floor plans?
Sure.
quickly, just as a reminder, Fahmida? Yes.
So this is level 1.
Mhm.
I can go on if you like.
Just a question there, there's no gymnasium at this?
Not on this level, it's on the 2nd floor.
Oh, it is,
Right
okay.
here. Yes, it's right there.
Okay.
That's a
And
basketball court size, isn't it?
Mhm.
So,
Typical gymnasium. And then the 3rd floor.
I guess I could just start by saying I think your presentation was really beautiful and very well put together. I'm extremely impressed with the quality of the presentation
Thank you.
and the rigor of your ideas and how you carried the ideas through into your design, like this idea of carving and clustering and having a 3-story building with all kinds of interconnections between levels, so a vertically connected building, and then carving in and out and creating small niches for quiet study and then larger areas for group study. You know, it's very masterful at what you've done. I'm very impressed. My only concern might be that it's a little bit too rich. It's so rich. If you go to your plan, it's like this school has everything that you could ever imagine, and it's fairly complex. And you know, there may be little quibbles about certain things, like in reality, each kindergarten playground would be completely separate from other age groups, and there'd be fences everywhere, and there are certain programmatic restraints that might not be reflected here, but I do think it's extremely well done. And that's just my initial comments about your presentation. Really, really nice, really inspiring and beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
yes, thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I might say I generally agree with Susan, who knows a lot about this stuff, very much. I think it's quite lovely. I kind of feel like if you could spend a little bit more time on it and compress it by 30% and get all the same payoff, you'd be a lot better on budget. You know, I mean, I'm just being silly, but you know what I mean? I feel like it would be a more powerful project. You know, it's kind of easy when it's 50% interstitial and 50% functional, you know. So if you could find the beautiful poetic little moments in a more compressed environment, I think they might be even more precious, I would say. So it's, you know, when you look at the 2nd floor plan and you see just how big a gym is in the context of the school, gym is usually
Right.
a kind of big monster, hard thing to fit, you know, but it kind of gently fits in a corner. You know, yeah, I just think it could be more powerful, a little bit more fine, you know, just a little bit finer scale, finer level of detail. I also, you know, I like the little bay windows and things in the classrooms, but I think you might even, you know, the classroom sort of feels like a kind of necessary evil or something. But, you know, especially post-COVID, you know, classrooms are reimagined as engaged learning environments that use different ways of, you know, gathering, different ways of kids getting together. So even the classroom itself is a potentially rich environment with, you know, a nook and a cranny there, but also different ways through technology of using it as well. So, you know, it's different than what you call, you know, the kind of industrial model, you know, teacher you know, might very well be at the head of the class, but quite often would be more like a roamer, you know what I mean? So, you know, don't be too mean about classrooms. I would say they have potential too, you know, and they're kind of, you know, expensive, right? So, but that's a synopsis of my feeling. I like it to sort of just tighten it and make the small moments powerful. I think would bring it to a super high level. But it's very nice start. I don't like your square lights on the soffit, but hey, you know, because they don't perform the way the little bay windows do. You know what I mean? They become decorative at that point, right? You know. Anyway, what do you think, Cheryl? Come on.
Well, I'm not supposed to comment. I'm just.
You're not?
Yeah.
Well, I can, but I should let the other guests comment.
I think it would be really really interesting to include Aurelia, to include your perspective, to come down from maybe the architect's conceptual level to the more concrete level of the child's perspective. And does it speak to you? Do you see an appropriateness to the scale for children, for the materiality for children, for the experiential quality that you would like to see in this kind of environment? Yes. Would you like to speak to that, Aurelia? You have to.
For sure. So first, I'd like to just say that I really enjoyed reading your thesis, and I really appreciated your presentation. I found both to be really interesting, and I'm especially appreciative of the application to the real world, right? So what actually happens with children and educators in the environment. And I think I was really excited with your thesis because I can also see the application to early childhood education programs, right? A lot of what you're suggesting, and I know that you pulled a lot from Montessori and Loris Nalaguzzi and so on, right? Also, it's very there's a lot of discussion around blending the indoors with the outdoors right now, and it could be it happened pre-COVID, but I think it's super important now about how we can use the outdoor as a learning environment as well. And so that notion, and I might not be getting the terminology right, so excuse me, but that in-between spaces that you talked about, I think are key. And also a lot of well, I don't know if it was a lot of what you were talking about, but you sort of allude to the importance of the informal environment. And that has such an application to practice for us, right? Because there's still sort of this belief that children only learn if the teaching is formal, but we know that that is not sort of true, right? That learning also occurs in the informal environment. And you didn't specifically allude to this in your thesis or your presentation, but I see children's rights, and that's like one of my areas, right? So of course I was looking for this for their education, was really interwoven throughout your thesis around their right to education. And also it's their right to be exposed to nature so that children can gain an appreciation for this. And you speak to that. And obviously from what you present, it would be so important for our children in practice, right? I do have sort of where I would have liked maybe to hear more about, but I'm not sure if this is appropriate, is I wasn't quite sure how your design supports inclusion. Even when I look at the way you presented the children within these spaces, I wonder about all children's right to be included in their classrooms. And I think for me, and I'm not sure that this is important for an architecture thesis, but as somebody from early childhood studies, I found it to be like, okay, so where's the right of all children to be included in these spaces, right? So your gymnasium is on the first floor, but you have multi-levels. So I was just wondering about that, which I think is key to EDI, right? And I think the other is I wondered where sort of, so for kindergarten in Ontario, the pedagogical approach is learning through play, right? And so I noticed, and I may have misinterpreted because I'm not from your field, but I didn't quite see how the way you were presenting the kindergarten area really supported the Ontario's approach to learning through play for kindergarten children. So I think, I mean, I have lots of other comments, but I think I'll stop there. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, Paul, but.
Yes, no, you're free to comment as you wish. It's just find those all important comments. Fahmida, would you like to speak to the kindergarten approach?
Yeah, I can mention that. So the initial idea was that there's the central courtyard with structured and unstructured play, which includes playgrounds and nooks and smaller areas of playgrounds and logs and natural environments. But initially, the kindergarten's outdoor terrace is on the second floor, where they have like a separate play space, which I know they require. So that was kind of the approach for that, if that answers the question slightly.
Sorry, do you mean the play-based approach?
Yeah, the play-based approach
is integrated throughout their whole day.
Okay.
So it's not.
Oh, you're talking about the curriculum.
So
like daily. Okay.
It's not separate from schooling, right?
Right.
Like it's all one. We learn, not we, but well, I guess we do. Children learn through play. So that's what I was. But I think the roof terrace being on the second floor, I think speaks to my inclusion issue of how will all children be able to access it in reality, right?
Right.
Can I just ask a question? Are you saying that all the kindergarten kids come up a set of stairs at recess? Go to
well, it's a roof terrace for everyone, but it's also like a kindergartner space where they could use it, but yeah, it would be.
I think we're surprised there's not a ramp or something, because ramps can be fun to play on and learn. We did one in Little Childcare at U of T. Cheryl did. And when the gym's on the second floor and you want to get to the outdoor playground, it seems a little hard to get to the elevator if you're in a wheelchair.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm not. It would be a long way to get to the elevator to go outside to play play sports in a wheelchair, right? So I can.
I understand.
Yeah, and it could be a kind of a thing that is fun for the kids too, and spatially interesting as well. We've done ramps in a lot of, or we used to do ramps when we did public schools, in most of our public schools, to the second floor.
I would say that, because it's a fairly large site, there should be no reason why you couldn't have the kindergarten play right at grade, right outside their classrooms, which is the absolute optimal arrangement.
It's still part of that.
Right.
Yeah, and don't forget the role of parents and how they come in, how they pick up and deliver their children, and at what time of day they pick them up and how they traverse the building. I just had a quick question about the building, because we did mention that it's very complex and lots of small spaces and big spaces and nooks and crannies and ins and outs. And I noticed in your program, you took the TDSB program and added a considerable area for circulation, which is totally valid because they always have, minimal circulation, just like one hallway for everybody to use. So I think, you added a tremendous amount of circulation. And I think your program said you added a cafeteria as well, right?
It's a multi-purpose area around the Sky Court on both floors. So Like,
So,
it
you know,
could
you added a
access.
lot of area, which is fantastic, but the downside, I guess, is, you know, how do you get oriented in this building? How do
Right.
you go from the ground floor to the third floor, northwest corner? How does a parent travel through this area? You know, I guess there's pros and cons to being too very, very complex,
Mhm.
which this is, but, you know, it's really you know, extremely detailed and complex, and it might start to fall apart with orientation through the building just because it's very, very complicated.
That's where I think compressing it might help, Susan, you know?
Yeah, and then the poor kids, every time they travel, they need to be escorted by a teacher. So you constantly have groups of, you know, 20 kids all following a teacher every time they go anywhere in this building, even to the washroom. So
I agree with you, Susan, there. I'm having a little trouble imagining in my mind the flow. Like, you typically imagine all the kids coming to the playground as the gathering place, and then going to all levels to classrooms from the playground. So there's usually convenient stairs by the playground to take the kids to the second floor or the kids to the first floor. But, you know, the main point of entry for children is usually the playground, not the street, right? So I just, you know, it's a little hard to imagine all these kids finding their way to their classrooms from the playground every, you know,
and multiple times a day, right? Like,
yeah,
there's
I
the
was gonna
morning
say,
recess,
outside,
there's the afternoon recess,
yeah.
there's lunch, you know, there's up and down the stairs
Yeah.
multiple times a day.
Yeah, so the stairs that take you from the playground to your classroom, I can see them there, but they're not,
Mhm.
they'd be really well used, basically, right? So they're quite prominent, you know?
Okay.
They're big.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment about the inclusion comment. I think if anything, this project totally addresses inclusion, maybe like times 1,000, because there's so many small one-on-one spaces and group spaces so that you can, you know, honor all types of learning. Like, inclusion is partly about your learning preference. Like, some kids might learn kinetically. They want to be moving all the time. They don't want to be sitting, you know, in a row in a classroom. There's all different learning modes. And you basically provided many, many, many different types of spaces and sizes and all kinds of things. So I would say, for that reason, you covered, you know, learning modalities with many, many different options for the teachers. Although the comment about the COVID and the virtual classrooms, which is now becoming pretty standard, like if there's a snow day, it'll just switch to, you know, virtual classrooms. And how do you accommodate that? I don't know. It's a bit early to know exactly what the future is with schools and virtual learning. So I can see why that, you know, hasn't necessarily been addressed. I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen.
Mhm.
I mean, I find those are very valuable comments that Susan and Stephen have made, Fahmida, and I'm probably it's even there in your definition of informal and formal spaces, but what they were really aiming at is around orientation and what Stephen was talking about in the play around the movement patterns.
Yeah.
And the movement patterns in the building, not just about being informally standing somewhere, but actually how do you move through the building and how you move maybe through the outdoor spaces, and how these are essentially a part of, I think, what Aurelia was pointing at, that this playfulness too. So it's so that you actually movement and running and moving through the building easily, always possibly knowing where you are, become part of the whole learning experience, and playfulness in the building.
That's a really good point, Paul, that that movement is a big part of learning, and it needs to be not so complicated that it's confusing.
Right.
Exactly. And so, yeah.
I was just curious about the library, kind of just, it feels a little off to the side as a place that would bring, you know, one thing when we
Central
childcares and so on, you know, you have your mandated playrooms for kids of different ages and such. But then we would often have one space where you could meet your brother or your sister, and different age groups would intermingle. We called it gross motor room. Sometimes in a school like this, the library kind of fulfills that function as this kind of gathering space. Also your interpretation of the library, I'm honestly not that aware at this level, but libraries that we work on now are pretty much everything to everyone, which is a good thing and a bad thing. They're maker spaces, they're music spaces, they're research spaces, they're social spaces. And I find the library, I wonder what the idea of it and the draw to it is. Like, what is it that brings kids from various age groups to this one shared environment? I guess I'm thinking in the plan that the library is maybe under achieves as that gathering, a community gathering space. It is kind of by its nature interstitial between your dedicated classroom, right?
Right.
You've actually,
Go ahead.
well, I see there's another room that she's called collective gathering space. That's just a little to the east of the library. Yeah. What's the difference, Fahmida, between those two spaces? What goes on in the collective gathering? Is that where you'd have a?
Yeah, they're close in size, actually, aren't they?
Yeah.
The collective gathering spaces indicates like if one or two classes come together as like to conduct like learning together in a larger group environment. And it's a multi-purpose space, so it has seatings and then I think one or two bookshelves, which are kind of spread out throughout the building as well.
But to get to the grade, the last classroom on that wing.
This one.
Yeah. So you walk through that gathering space. It's funny.
It's an open area.
Yeah. The corridor sort of disappears in between the cloakroom and the collective space, and then. Yeah, I mean it's a kind of meander between enclosed. The interstitial space is the corridor essentially, right? There is no official corridor. You've got the classrooms floating in this circulation space that becomes activity area as well as movement area.
I just wanted to ask Fahmida, this is your final thesis, so you're not going to go back and change it. I mean, it's finished, right?
I hope not.
Yeah, okay. No, I was just going to say, I like Stephen's comment about the library, and I was thinking the Sky Court, some major central space like that would be fantastic. You arrive and there's, the shared library space. There is a bit of a problem with the Sky Court entrance and the central foyer. Both have a similar central foyer,
right.
And that is that it's breaks up the sight lines within the space and the flow, and you have to walk around it, and the staff can't see, the other side of the corridor. So you'll find that as you start practicing architecture, sight lines are really critical in institutional, recreation centers and schools, and how the staff, like in the playground, can see the most possible, and people can't hide behind corners. It's kind of passive security and safety.
Right.
That's very, very important in public schools, particularly. So the Sky Court, seeing as you have so much green everywhere else, maybe you don't need a green courtyard or quite so big, or that blocks, a lot of views and circulation and forces you to go around it. That's just a quick comment, but you're not going to be changing this. But I do think passive security is a huge issue in a public school.
I agree with you, Susan, and I want to make sure that you understand that you can achieve that passive security and the spatial variety and the spatial accidents that you want to, or social accidents that you want to create. You can have both, right? And I agree that those blockages aren't really helping. They could really, actually, I would say the building, the kind of gathering opportunities in the school would be enhanced if those were simplified. You improve your chances of coming to these little spaces and finding friends in a nook, rather than harm that opportunity.
Yeah, just having a simple colonnade around that space. So it's one space just with a defined zone for circulating, or a drop in the floor level would define it, but give you continuous sight lines and alternate routes to cross it.
Yeah, and then the other thing you could have looked at, or in the future could look at, is spaces for parents. Parents spend a lot of time in schools, and they often have their own meeting rooms and their own areas, and a place that they're meant to go to when they enter the school. They're not meant to wander freely around the school. They have to be kind of contained. And so usually you would have a parent kind of room, I think.
Fahmida, following Susan's comment, I want to bring you to the very beginning of our discussions about the unfortunate role of COVID that educated us in the concept of school in contemporary society, and how we learned a lot from COVID's restrictions of what the school's role is. And I haven't heard anything or haven't seen anything in your thesis in reference to that question, even though I think that the whole idea of looking at school was the social role of it in the contemporary, unfortunately, pandemic environment. How do parents and society respond to schools' function? What is school educating them in as the, so to speak, common place for their children? We learned that parents don't go to work when children go to school. What does that mean in relationship to the school concept? You've got tremendous architectural credit, but none of the social issues were addressed. Neither the family issue, nor the social issue, nor the issues of interacting between the school and the society. Anyways, you probably decided not to do it because it's not quite inside your thesis, but I think it's a very important question in the time of pandemic. You remember this conversation?
Yes, I do. I think early on, yeah.
I didn't mean to finish the conversation.
No.
It's a lovely building. It's I really admire not only the layout, which I think is quite ingenious, but also materiality of the building. The use of wood and glass and light materials really make this building a happy place. And I congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to reiterate that even though we're finding little, things that could improve, I do go back to my first comments, which is this is extremely well done. And I really like the way you interleave nature and greenery into the whole building on every level, regardless of maybe there's too many roof terraces or the building is not compact enough and, will be fantastically expensive. But the idea was you brought nature deep into this building, and I think that's fantastic. And there's lots of daylight and views everywhere, transparency, there's openness, there's visual connections between levels. And if you think about it, a school is a kind of communication platform. It's telling people this is what education is. It's giving a message. And I think this building is giving a fantastic message to the world. So I do want to congratulate you, Fahmida. It's really, really nicely done. Very graphically powerful too.
Thank
The
you.
renderings are spectacular. Your drawings are beautiful.
I was going to mention one of the challenges we have as an office is we like a lot of natural light and stuff, which tends to create a lot of surface area, which tends to go against sustainability. Your best design from a sustainability perspective, from an energy perspective, would be a simple box, right? So it is very stretched out, and you're going to have, it's going to use an incredible amount of energy, so much roof surface, so much wall surface, and the fact that it's pockets of space on the third floor with even more wall surface. So, it's not really proposing an energy efficient type of solution. It's balancing other things in favor over energy and carbon. I just one last other little comment. I think there may have been some advantages. I understand, it's been a modernist thing forever to have a zone of nature sort of coming through the middle of something, right? Like, sun therapy clinics and fascist architecture, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But there's disadvantages to a U-shaped plan as well as advantages to a U-shaped plans, and having the natural world pass through is the big advantage. But it does create dead-ended circulation, which does limit flow and communication between children. So I think to what extent that could have been virtual versus a law, no one's going to walk under the bridge canopy in the winter. It's not going to happen, right? And so you've got kids kind of filtering to opposite ends of the school on the ground floor, not on the second. And, that has some disadvantages. So there could be an experiment with it coming a little bit, touching a little bit, more closely, but still the indoors and outdoors appearing to merge together with a little bit better outcome socially within the school, I would say. So that's my final observation about your basic RT.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we did have this this discussion. I mean, you developed it around the pedagogy of what, and it's clear that the architecture can't dictate a pedagogy, but it definitely can, and certainly can, promote and support pedagogical ideals. And it's clear also that you are advancing a contemporary understanding of education, or the institution of education as we have it today. It's not questioning, is that the way we will educate our children in the future? Is that the way it looks? Does it still happen in the school building like this, and for a community, regulated in a district for certain areas, the way the Toronto District School Board operates today? Or will it be something totally different? Or will it be a combination of virtual and physical? the same way that our working environments are changing, how will maybe our learning environments change? So you haven't addressed that. We've talked about it, but you haven't addressed it, and I don't think it was your task to do that here. But you've definitely advanced current understanding and models, even if you in the tables that you have for what the district school board, Toronto District School Board prescribes for space sizes, and what you've included. Susan hinted at it, that you've added 38%, I think it was it, for spaces that are dedicated.
The circulation.
Yeah. So that's a lot. That's a lot. That's already a massive difference in understanding of the way a school operates. Yes, I mean, Aurelia, are you holding back? You have some further comments for us?
Yeah, sure. So I just, it might be out of sync right now because it was a comment I wanted to make earlier, but Susan's comment about sightlines. So from the field's point of view, sightlines are so important to us because we do, especially the younger children. So maybe this isn't childcare, but a lot of these ideas, like I said, could work so well for younger children. We have to be able to see children at all times. So I just kind of wanted to confirm that even from a practitioner's point of view, those sightlines are really important, as well as welcoming families into the environment, whether it's a school or whatever, having a place for families to come in and feel like they also belong in that sort of school community, I think is pivotal to sort of just their family engagement, I guess, right? And I see a lot of your ideas, it constantly brought me back to sort of the Reggio Emilia approach in the way that light and transparency and the way the corridors are used, the piazza, which is, I guess, kind of like your gathering spaces, but it's more collective of the whole preschool. But so I guess I just would like to hear a little bit about your transitional spaces as a learning street. I found that fascinating because, again, those are concepts that I've encountered. And so I was just trying to imagine sort of wanting to understand how you would imagine that looks like. What transitional spaces and the corridors that you named as learning streets, because those are usually areas that are not used, right?
Well, I think the main approach was that the corridors flow in and out of these informal areas. So I think this diagram, but these areas do open up and they have that opportunity of being closed off as well. So it's technically not a corridor if they're flowing in and out of all of these spaces, kind of which converts it into these informal spaces of learning. But I don't know if that answers it. In terms of the transitional areas, it was kind of looking at the idea of that, having these moments of spaces within, and they're activated areas where classrooms open up to it, or arts and areas open up to it. So
okay, so I interpret it from a pedagogical approach, which would be that as children sort of walk through these areas, there are things for them to explore and do along the way. But that's not what you meant. Yours is all about movement, which is also very important. But okay, great, thank you.
Actually, I have to go to a energy thing at the moment, so is it okay if I slide on out?
Sure, we're almost done here if we have no further comments. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, I'm gonna also sign off.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much,
Fahmida,
Susan.
again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Okay,
for joining.
bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Susan.
So we don't have any further final comments, perhaps someone, Marco or Masha?
Well, we've gone to our time. I just want to just quickly throw something in, and just been very interesting to listen to the discussion because it just serves as a reminder for me of just how complex these projects are. You know, your topic is interstitial learningscapes, but we got to think about sightlines and security and energy efficiency and budget and blah, blah, blah. Pretty soon, you know, you get burdened with all this stuff. So I think it's an important reminder of that. And I think that in the context of a thesis, the point isn't to solve every problem of architecture. The point is to focus in on a particular set of issues and zoom in on those. So I think that, you know, I'd like to bring it back more to that. You know, now we're not going to continue the discussion at any length now, but you know, we I think got a little bit bogged down in the discussion maybe around some of these more pragmatic issues, which are always there. I mean, they're not irrelevant, but the focus of the thesis is not about that, right? The focus of the thesis is about these learningscapes. One of the things that's interesting to me, you know, Paul, you were talking about this idea of anticipating the education of the future, and you know, from the comments that both Steve and Susan contributed, you know, who are people who are designing schools, and the recognition that most schools are still being designed on the factory model. You know, the idea that we're anticipating what's coming next. I mean, the educational theories that inform this are 100 years old, and we're still not building them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how can we even think about the future when we're not even building a century old theory into our buildings? So we're way behind. Way behind in this sort of way of thinking. The other thing I just wanted to add quickly, and this is coming because I don't know much about educational architecture. I've never designed schools, but I'm very interested in typology and the whole discussion of how we use our knowledge of architecture to inform what we do. I'm really intrigued by, you know, when I look at your plan, your ground floor plan, which we spent a lot of time on the screen. So I was at it. There it is again. And you know, this is a 3-story building, so this typology doesn't quite apply. But if I was just looking at this ground floor plan, I would say this is based on a mat building. And so what's a mat building, and what does it do well, and what does it not do well? And I think those are some of the interesting discussions to have about the typological approach, right? Because one of the things, when I think of a mat building, it's all about you know, multiple possible pathways as opposed to a single kind of solution. It's usually anti-hierarchical, right? I mean, part of the whole thinking behind the mat when it was developed in the 50s and 60s by the Smithsons and that whole crew, and a lot of it was, you know, often the mat building was proposed for university buildings, and part of the desire there was to create a single large building, like a mega structure, that brought all the disciplines together into a single building that overcame this idea of segregation into silos. And that also then broke down this idea of hierarchies, right? You were in a 1-story building that kind of covered the landscape. You weren't climbing up monumental stairs into a colonnaded entrance and so on and so forth. All very interesting, but also really problematic, right? So orientation was a huge problem. How would you find where you were going? It was easy when there was a chemistry building, not so easy when the chemistry department was in level 62F, you know, on some abstract plan. It's like negotiating the underground path system in Toronto, downtown Toronto, right? So I think these become really interesting discussions. Is also, you know, a kind of analysis of the typology and what is well served by certain typologies and what is not. So I think that the MAT model that you're using here is really interesting from the point of view of some of the things you're trying to achieve and breaking down ideas of hierarchy and creating multiple pathways and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the flip side is something we've already heard, you know, in the critique, which is orientation, sight lines, all those kinds of things. So interesting that you rub up against this stuff whenever you try to do something different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it one more time. This key figure number is there. This increase of 38% for informal spaces compared to the Toronto District School Board. So if you would in reality be sitting down with them and they've pulled out their 300-page guideline document that they have, and you have to argue against it, and you'd have to show why you need those based on what Aurelia is also talking about, how playful learning happens actually, in what spaces that happens, the movement patterns we talked about. So you'd have to argue for those and show how you're using those spaces, these 38% that you've declared there. And I think just looking at just looking at your drawing, that you have a strong argument for how you're actually intending to use those spaces. So that's where I think it's successful. No.
I also think that experiential learning is a huge part of your design, and you didn't talk about it enough, particularly when you talked about cluster spaces, because those as experiential learning spaces, they're perfectly placed and perfectly located, and you could organize your functionality of that learning process around the cluster spaces. In other words, you have a lot of non-obvious discussions, but that become obvious once you bring them up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So I think, as Marco said, we're already a little over time. So we would like to close this session now. Fahmida, thank you very much for your presentation. We will withdraw as the panel, and Cheryl will be in touch with you shortly then.